Good afternoon, everybody. We're happy to have you here. This is the Great Plains Radio History Symposium, and since so many of you have never been to one before, let's talk a little bit about what we try to do here. The symposium was founded about 10 years ago after Dave McFarland, who you'll hear from in just a second, and I went to a special meeting in Kansas City. It was the 50th anniversary of Top 40 Radio, 50th anniversary of Top 40 Music. And at that convention, there were people who had worked at WHB, at KUDL, which are the two stations we're going to be highlighting today, and folks who had worked really all around radio in Kansas City. And the momentous thing about that event is the fact that it was a gathering of folks who had helped change the face of radio forever. And Top 40 Radio was so big in its day and its heyday, and we hope to be able to recapture some of that today. The Great Plains Radio History Symposium has continued for 10 years with the idea that we would be able to help people like my age who grew up listening to radio to kind of recapture what it used to be, but to also help people your age understand the role that radio plays and how radio really did help shape the rural Midwestern part of the country. And a lot of you have had class from me, so you've heard me say this, but it is remarkable when you stop and think that we are led to believe that so much of radio happened on the East Coast and then kind of found its way here to the Midwest, which really isn't true. In fact, Top 40 Radio, which we're going to be talking about today, was something that grew up here in our own backyard. And so we have two panels today. Our first panel is going to be going back and looking at the history of two Top 40 radio stations in Kansas City that went head-to-head and what the programming philosophies of those stations were. Our second panel is going to get us into the field of streaming as we talk about recreating radio with audio streams today, and we're going to meet three entrepreneurs, all of them now who are running streamed radio stations as a business model for the future of broadcasting. One of the founders of our conference is no longer with us. Richard Ward Fatherly passed away about 3.5 years ago. Richard Ward Fatherly was in Kansas City. He was program director of WHB, and he started writing a book about the Stores Company's definitive role in building Top 40 Radio, and in turn, being one of the companies that jumped in and saved radio from what many people felt was extinction of the medium. And Richard, unfortunately, passed away in the middle of the writing of the book, and there were several people who took part in the actual finishing of Dick's book. Well, the lead author in that effort was Dave McFarland. Dave is a former member of our faculty, emeritus faculty here in the A.Q. Miller School of Journalism and Mass Communications. And Dave is going to actually set the stage for us as to why we remember WHB, which, by the way, those of you from the metro area know is a sports station and may have even listened to the World Series game last night. That's not the WHB we're talking about. We're talking about the day when WHB was the powerhouse of Top 40 Radio. So, Dr. Dave McFarland.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. WHB in Kansas City was truly one of the nation's pioneer radio stations. It debuted in the very early days of radio broadcasting on 710. It eventually became 810. But it began broadcasting back in April of 1922, and it was owned by the Cook Paint and Varnish Company. This was a station that tried to cover everything by playing and doing everything that there could possibly be. Count Basie, the famous jazz musician, led a studio band for WHB, and it was only one of two bands that the station had. The studios were in the Scarrett Building in downtown Kansas City, which is still there. Most of the pictures and the memorabilia from WHB's heyday were still on display when Jack Sampson arrived there in 1950. He's one of the people who is prominent in this book as a brand new account executives. And he said that 4 years before the station would be sold to stores, he said, we were young ones who agreed that the call letters WHB stood for "We Have Been." In other words, the thing was so old and worn out that, okay. He was a graduate, Jack Sampson was, of this university when it was Kansas State Agriculture College. When Todd Storrs bought WHB in 1954, this is the guy who had begun the top 40 format in Omaha a couple years earlier than that. Storrs was just 29 years old. He had put hits on KOWH in Omaha in '53. He put them on WTIX in New Orleans to great success. And in 1954, WHB in Kansas City sold to Storrs for $400,000 then, which is about $3,300,000 today. So a big bunch of money to get WHB. WHB was a full-time signal at 710 kilohertz. That means it was on at good strength day and night. And it covered, being at that dial position, it covered a whole lot more territory than it would be in other, further up the radio dial. It was heard in Omaha, Joplin, Columbia, Missouri, Salina, Kansas. But when they acquired the station, it had so little listenership that people joked, we're number 7 in a 5-station market. Programming was a hodgepodge of hillbilly bands, a cowboy singer, soap operas, programs designed for housewives, play-by-play of the Kansas City Blues with Mickey Mantle, coverage of the University of Kansas, University of Missouri football, basketball, daily church program. When did you tune in to what? Who knew? And the whole idea that a station did one thing all the time and did it well, and especially with music, was just revolutionary. Well, the Storrs top 40 format went on WHB's air in July of 1954, and it had a countdown show. It was a 3-hour program that featured the top 30 songs then in reverse order, starting with number 30 and counting down to 1. They called it WHB's 40-star super hit survey. And you can imagine how they said it. The WHB 40-star, 30-star super hit survey. Okay. And the top 10 countdown was the lead-in to the teen appeal programming, which followed in the evening. They figured that only teenagers would be listening to the station in the nighttime, since they're out of school at that point, and the parents would be off, watching TV, and that worked very well. And so the other Storrs stations that developed after that also did an afternoon countdown show, and the idea was to bring the audience to a top 10 conclusion. In other words, the top 10 biggest records were the ones that you wanted to hold off until the end. Well, in less than a year of Storrs ownership, WHB's share of Kansas City listeners shot up to almost half of the entire available audience. That's how big a revolution it was. Half of all radio listening to WHB, and it stayed there. And the annual revenues, as I said, were about $2 million. It was incredibly successful. And somebody asked later in the Storrs era what WHB meant. And the answer was, we're the world's happiest broadcasters. And that was a slogan which they used all the time. It was the flagship of everything that was developed in the way of being energetic, lively, community-oriented, and fun. And it was, so in many ways, it was the flagship. Let's play a clip now from WHB, and this would be from the 1960s.
The WHB electronic time tone is accurate to within 1/20,000th of a second. At the tone, exactly 8 o'clock. More music, more often, on WHB. Hello there, I'm Bob Elliott. Let's go one more one. The next 55.
Pretty far from rock and roll.
Oh, Jackie Wilson, and that's called Night. And here it is, a wonderful night in WHB land. Hello there, how are you this evening? Channel 71 WHB, Kansas City. Temperature reading of 66 degrees. So did you hear that little bit that Jerry Mason reported a moment ago from London? An angry British feminist said that it's a disgraceful thing that Princess Margaret will promise to obey Anthony Armstrong Jones in her marriage vows. Marion Reeves, elderly head of the Women's Freedom League, says no woman should promise to obey any man. It might be well to point out that she is known as Miss Marion Reeves, and she is elderly. Capiche? Okay.
All of you women can get up and leave.
WHB Happy Time reminds me so very much of that sad story of the girl who bought herself a ship and shore blouse and then discovered she didn't have the coastline for it. Here's Bobby Rydell, ding-a-ling. Ding-a-ling. Ba-ba-ba-ba-bee-da-dum. You're my ding-a-ling. Bobby Rydell here on the Bob Elliott Show, swinging along with music, a song that's called Ding-a-Ling. Yes, sir, they've improved the ding-a-ling quite a bit, and they have new cars and horns that sound something like this. Oh, I like that. 9 minutes past 8, WH, be careful on the highway time. Fiction and fact through 4 Robert's Almanac. Humanity is making slow but sure progress. Thus far, we've been able to confine germ warfare to the TV commercials. Marv Johnson, honey, I love the way that you love. Honey, I love the way that you love. One more time. 66 degrees right now in WHB land. Let's go to break time, huh? On the Bob Elliott Show, the Chattanooga Choo-Choo. Eddie Fields and crew for you, that's called the Chattanooga Choo-Choo, the old Glenn Miller bit of the 40s. We'd like to dedicate that especially to my cat at home, who's a very smart cat. She eats cheese and then waits beside the mouse hole with bated breath.
It's wonderful. Summer radio on WHB in Kansas City.
Oh, yeah, you be sure and always pick up on all the swinging happenings of the day in the mighty Midwest here in WHB, Kansas City, on the Mo side. This is WHB, Kansas City, Missouri. Jim Reeves on the Bob Elliott Show. This is called He'll Have to Go. Big number 1 this week in the happy land of WHB here on the Bob Elliott Show. That's called Good Time. And wasn't that a wonderful orchestra we had? Oh, boy. We didn't have enough money to buy phonograph records, so we hired them instead. Here's the WHB Baseball Scoreboard, brought to you by 7-Up.
Nothing does it like 7-Up, 7-Up. Nothing does it like 7-Up.
Okay, I think we got the idea. Let's go ahead and go over to KUDL. Most stations that tried to go up against WHB didn't make it, but KUDL was one of the valiant AM stations that did succeed against WHB. And Mike Darcy and Wally Thornton will have more to say about KUDL's accomplishments, but let's listen to a little clip of what that sounded like.
Here are the scores of the games that were played today.
At the top of the 5-stair steps of the big 13-8, and oh, child, would you get off my foot, you dummy?
Those were madness lurks in the minds of men. Midnight madness strikes. At JP's Boutique, Westport and Broadway, Wednesday night. Special prices on heavy merchandise. Bell jeans, regularly $10 to $12, just $5.95. Or two pair for $11. Midnight madness at JP's. Free Coke and Kitty Corporate Promotions. Freddie Van Clay there with freebies to give away. Midnight madness and movies to go by. The JP's Boutique, Westport and Broadway, Wednesday night, open till midnight.
By the way, Buddy Van Cleve, the great bee breeder, will have his all his freebies over at JP's Boutique. Be sure to wear a net over your face or you'll get stung. Sound of Blues Image, riding with the captain, 627, Ron O'Brien in your line from KUDL, baby. 73 men sailed up from the San Francisco Bay.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Ron O'Brien.
KUDL, fareway. It is 6:30 in the nitty-gritty city with ROB. Signed, sealed, delivered. This is Steve Wonder out of Motor City. Like a fool, I went and stayed too long. Oh, you voluptuous creature. Here I am, baby. Signed, sealed, and delivered. I am yours. Sorry, I accept no CODs. 6:30 and 3 in the city with Roe Bryan on a Monday night. Got the B.J. Thomas on. I just can't help believing.
I just can't help believing when she smiles up soft and gentle with a trace of
KUDL. All right. 6:57 in the city, little good gold from KUDL. 1968 box tops. Choo choo train.
I got a present for brother.
Much tighter. talk right up to the vocal. That's
Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to Ron O'Brien.
KUDL, Fairway.
7 o'clock in the city. Sunday night with Ron O'Brien in your mind, Tellman. Partly cloudy skies at 86 degrees. Gonna be doing some wine spilling. Get the blood-shot eyes and let the booze run off.
All right, so let's set the stage then. You've heard it. You've heard the sounds of the two stations. WHB, personality-oriented. We're going to stop the music. We're going to communicate with you. Then you heard KUDL, which was KUDL, you know, the big classic top 40 jock. The idea then that there was going to be a ratings war in Kansas City was pretty well established when Star Broadcasting decided that they would go up against the market leader. Now remember what Dave said, a 50 share. 50% of all people listening to radio were listening to WHB. So what was KUDL and Star Broadcasting even thinking, trying to go up against a dominant market force like that? Well, we're going to find out today. I'm going to introduce our panel who all have direct history relating to that era of Kansas City radio. Mike Darcy is the fellow that you see on the screen up here. Mike is at home with his wife in Kansas City. He first heard top music in 1954 when he was a student at Creighton University. And remember that Omaha is the town where all of this began with the Storrs Broadcasting Company. And he listened to the flagship station for the Storrs Company, KOWH. And but he went around the country, and as the old song goes, up and down the dial, town to town, and ended up in Kansas City because Star Broadcasting had purchased this frequency in Kansas City, and they decided to go head-to-head against WHB. And so Mike was the guy as program director who helped make this happen. And so we're going to be talking to him. He later on to become the national program director for all of the Star stations. And then in 1969, or 1971, I should say, he left broadcasting to become a stockbroker. Wally Thornton is with us today. Wally is at the middle spot here on the table. Wally has been in radio since 1953. He first started announcing at KWIL in Albany, Oregon, and over 61 years, his professional career has taken him to many markets. Well, Wally actually had the opportunity to work for the Storrs Broadcasting Company in two markets. He worked for WHB and also worked at WDGY in Minneapolis, St. Paul. But he also had the opportunity to work for the McClendon stations, and Gordon McClendon was also a big broadcast entrepreneur in the top 40 era. He worked at WRIT in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and KPLP in El Paso, Texas. Wally worked at WHB and had the greatest air name I've ever heard in all of broadcasting. He was J. Walter Beethoven, honestly. J. Walter Beethoven. He'll even tell us how that happened. He then got off the air after he did the 2.5-year stint at WHB and went to work as a sales representative at KUDL. And since then has had many stints in broadcast sales, including being the national sales manager for KMBZ and KMBR in Kansas City. In 1999, he founded All Star Casting Incorporated, and today at age 82, he still works as a signatory producer. Ray Jans is a sales guy and has been a sales guy in broadcasting most of his entire life. He did work at KKJO in St. Joseph and then crosstown competitor KUSN. He moved to Kansas City and worked for WHB in 1968 when the station was facing its competition from KUDL. He then converted to television sales. He worked at KMBC Channel 9 before moving on to other sales jobs in Detroit, San Antonio, Providence, Rhode Island. He became general manager of KIII Television in San Antonio in Corpus Christi, Texas, before moving back to Channel 9 in Kansas City. In 1982, he founded Jans and Associates Advertising, which he managed until 1996. He left the media business and went into the business of restoring classic cars and street rods and operated a trucking company. Ray is retired and lives in Raymore, Missouri. And I guess the first question, and Mike, we're going to start with you, and I believe your microphone is still muted, so we're going to have you unmute. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mike Darcy in Kansas City. Mike, I guess we're going to start with you. A 50 share of the market is what you were going up against with KUDL, going up against WHB. Tell us a little bit about what everybody was thinking.
Well, to begin with, I admired WHB from 1954. They also came into Omaha like a ton of bricks. My family had a vacation place south of Bemidji, Minnesota. We go up there in the summertime. WHB sounded south of Bemidji 10 or 15 miles as if it was in over the next hill. That is the kind of signal they had. They also had the cream of the crop of disc jockeys from the very beginning. I mean, they were the founders of Top 40 Radio along with McClendon. So I never underestimated WHB. People came to Kansas City and taped the station from everywhere and take it home and try and duplicate it. So I knew exactly what they were. But I also knew that with 50% of the audience, there was an opportunity there for KUDL to grab some of that. Now, WHB and most top 40s, and I worked at several others around the country, one of our main problems was the competition liked to describe us as serenading acne scratchers and little bitty kids. And so Chuck Bloor at KFWB came up with a line with his daughter. She recorded, said, "My mommy listens to WHB," or "My mommy listens to KUDL," or whatever. And it worked. It worked with, it showed not only are the kids listening, mama's listening. So you got the daytime audience. And anyway, when Star Broadcasting bought KUDL, it was a distress sale. Eugene Burdick, the author, had purchased it after having several best-selling books, and he figured he couldn't write bestsellers forever, so he needed a source of income. He bought KUDL. They went through several formats, including all news at the time that Star bought him, but he had died in the meantime, and the place was hemorrhaging money. So that's how Star came to Kansas City. Now, when I came down here, I figured stores had lots and lots of business. When you got 50% of the audience, you are loaded with spots, as many as you want to run. And so there was an opportunity for us to attract the young kids of the 1950s who were listening to the KOWHs and early 54, 55 WHBs. These were now people who were in their 20s, mid-20s, many of them. So they'd kind of grown up with the music. And so we went for the younger demographic. And when I got here, the station had little or no business. They had J. Walter Beethoven was doing the morning show. And when I was doing the paperwork for the FCC, I was listening to in 66, I was listening to these promos saying, WHB switches to Beethoven on Monday, and I thought, oh my goodness, how can I be so fortunate? The #1 top 40 of the world is going classical music. That lasted about 15 seconds, and I thought, whoops, no, that's not going to happen, and it didn't. And Wally, that you're looking at there, is probably one of the premier disc jockeys of the 1960s, and at some major radio stations. So I had absolutely no misconceptions about what we were going to run into. My thought was we could eat away at the lower end demographic, the 18 to 35s, because those are the teenagers of the 50s, and now they're 22, 25, 26 years old. And since we didn't have any business on the air, we could really play more music because we had nothing but a few jingles and promos for the most part to fill up our airtime other than music. And we ended up with a starting group of very, very young guys that we brought down, some from Sioux Falls where we had a station, and others that I'd known in Phoenix came in. And they did okay, but they weren't any match for what was at WHB. And then I heard from some of my Phoenix friends who were out in Los Angeles that KFWB, the top 40 kind of modeled on WHB in a way, was beginning to fade, and a station called KHJ was using a format very, very tight with limited commercials, and they were eating away very quickly at the KFWB dominance, which was similar in Southern California to WHB in Kansas City. And as luck would have it, the people that programmed this station in Los Angeles that was taking KFWB apart also was consulting KAKC in Tulsa, and I happened to get a couple of tapes from disc jockeys there that wanted to come to Kansas City. So I hired a couple of them, and we discussed the modifications in our more music format at that point, and we adopted a version of the Drake Boss 30 format, which was the top 40 killer as it turned out. And we pretty much followed the basic tenets of that. We were basically doing it anyway, but we had the good fortune to get the inside track on some of the finer points of it, which we installed. And long story short, we were able to attract a large segment of the 18 to 34 audience. HB still had super ratings. I don't think we ever beat them except in certain segments and certain age groups, and then just for limited periods. But we did accumulate enough listeners to sell advertising and make it a financial success.
Let me break in here and ask Wally a question. In my conversations with people who worked in Chicago, you know, folks who worked at WLS always said that they were a better radio station because they had WCFL across town to compete with. So let me ask you about this. You had this station licensed to Fairway, which is a Kansas City suburb. You had the station licensed to Fairway that went on the air doing top 40 music. How was that viewed inside of the Stores Company, and did that change your programming philosophy at WHB?
Well, the truth of the matter is I was only there for a few months after KUDL went on the air.
Mm-hmm.
My stance on it was, yes, they are going to take some audience. Some of the people thought, you know, well, here's this little peanut whistle, again, you know, trying to get some of our stuff going, and nothing's going to happen. So there was a sort of a mood, I think, at least with some people, not with Ray. He's never been complacent in his life. Complacency about the fact that this station was going to happen at all.
What did any of the programming philosophy at WHB change? Did you scramble to, for example, to try to get the younger part of the demographic listening to WHB?
I don't think so. Mm-hmm. Is it Ray?
No.
No, I think it stayed pretty much the same.
Okay. Now,
I just want to add one thing
yes.
to you about Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
Which is where I'm from. The WLS, when I was up there as a teenager listening, was the voice of labor, and WCFL was there, I think, and WJJD was the big rocker.
Right.
And it was patterned directly after WHB.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, Ray was the sales manager at WHB roughly at this time. So you've got a competitor sitting across town. What does that do to your sales effort? Did you feel the heat at all?
None whatsoever. We really didn't pay that much attention to them. The objective on some of the Hooper reports that we got, which give you the percentage of what your your radio was, we were up at sometimes up to 65% of the audience. That was a little earlier, but then, it run pretty close to the 50, 55. I think it dipped down into the 40s there for a while after when KUDL got real hot and doing some heavy promotion. That helps. And he's not smiling yet, but
Yes, he is. The interesting thing about KUDL, and all three of you can probably chime in on this radio station, which is still on the air today, it's on 1380 on the dial. It's not KUDL anymore. In fact, those call letters have left Kansas City, those of you who are from the metro area. I think it's all news or all religion now. What's on 1380 today? Mike, do you know what's on 1380 today?
I think it may be religious programming.
Okay.
Most of the stations that I worked with in top 40 down through my career, I think I'm an ambassador from God, because after I leave, they all end up becoming religious broadcasting facilities of one sort. Of course, they were all above 1,000 on the dial to start with, so
yeah.
Well, God to do anything with them.
Well, the interesting thing is that from the start, Mike, you were really disadvantaged by the coverage. WHB, as you mentioned earlier, was a station that operated with 10,000 watts at 710 on the dial and literally boomed out over the entire Midwestern part of the country. KUDL was very limited in its reach.
You have no idea how limited it was.
As an example of that, I had gone to KUDL in my first sales job a few months after they were in the market. And I lived in what was called Old Leawood, Kansas. And right down 83rd Street was the way I went home. And when the sun went down and we cut our power, I couldn't hear the station 6 miles from it. I am here to tell you today, in my own opinion, I was convinced at the time that KUDL had something and they were going to offer competition to WHB. And I swear that if they'd had a better signal, they'd had better numbers.
Mm-hmm. Our nighttime signal was a bell, and the bell opened up over central Kansas City, and you could be in western Kansas City, Kansas, and not be able to hear us. You could be in southeast Kansas City and not be able to hear us. You could be at 95th and Metcalf, which was the kind of the crossroads of Johnson County for a long time. And at 9 o'clock at night in the summertime, if the pattern change took place, we were gone oftentimes. And as a program director up against 710, 10,000 watts, number one in Bemidji and Joplin and Tulsa, different places, that was a concern,
But they didn't do too bad in Alaska and Canada too.
Yeah, right. But the one thing that we did have was what little we had pretty much covered everything east of Main Street in Kansas City, and pretty much from the river to 95th Street, the eastern half of Kansas City, Missouri, which was where there was a great audience that listened primarily to KPRS, which was the rhythm and blues station in Kansas City, but they were a daytimer, and I figured out who do these people listen to when their station has to sign off at 5:15 in November and December. and they didn't have anybody. So I was talking with Teddy Atkins, who was a Kansas City DJ and later program director and consultant, radio station owner, and he told me about a young man who was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania at the time. His name was Anderson Little, and he said Anderson would fit in fine at the R&B station, and he's a black DJ. He's terrific. And he sent me a tape of him, and I thought, well, this makes a lot of sense. Here's Anderson Little. He's going to appeal to the whole KPRS audience that has nobody to listen to after sundown. And not only that, but the music we were playing in 67, 68, that was the big wave of the Motown success. The playlist was full of people like the Supremes, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder. So he was playing music that was directed at that audience. It was the one place that our signal went at night, and we did very, very well at night. And then I was lucky enough to run into Ron O'Brien a couple of years later, and of course Ron was something unto himself. Meanwhile, Anderson Little, who we call J.P. Soul on the air, went back to Pittsburgh, where he became a big personality on the public television station there, representing the black community activities in Pittsburgh. He passed away a couple of years ago, but he was an amazing young man, a tremendous talent, and loved by his audience.
If I could just break in here, Dave McFarland again. In the research that I did for my book on Top 40, one of the things that I looked for was a lot of the trade magazine advertising. In other words, advertising to and by people in the radio business. And there were several of those: Broadcasting Magazine, Sponsor, some others. In other words, these are the magazines that the people in the business looked at to figure out how to make money. And the knock against all of Top 40 radio, not just the store stations and not just the ones we're hearing about here, was that only kids listened. And so stores did some really good research about this. And this is, I'm going to read a paragraph here from Sponsor magazine in 1957. There's a photo of a woman standing at her front door as a neighbor begins to cross the street with children. There's a radio on a table next to the front door. The caption reads, "The kids have left for school. Now what station will she listen to?" And the text under their photo continues, "All new surveys show again," and this is in big capital letters in the ad, "when the youngsters are away, Kansas City radios stay with WHB." And it was true. Let's look 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday and see what happens to Kansas City radio listening when all those teenagers are at school. WHB continues its domination. According to every major survey, every one of the 140 quarter hours from 9 to 5 belongs overwhelmingly to WHB. This, mind you, when there are no teenagers available to listen because they're in school. No wonder WHB carries regular schedules for virtually every major Kansas City food chain, A&P, Milgram's, Thriftway, Wolferman's, Kroger, etc. So that they mention all the big companies that are willing to put stuff on what supposedly is a teenage station. It wasn't. It was a mass appeal radio station. Okay, just wanted to make that clarification.
One of the points then to make, Mike, is the fact that probably KUDL had a diverse staff long before most radio stations, right?
Yes, I had also done this in Phoenix, Arizona in 1959. I got a tape in the mail from a young man in Philadelphia, and had a big, beautiful voice, tremendous delivery, and he showed up at the, and we were top 40, and he showed up at the station, and the receptionist said, "Hey, Mike, there's a young black gentleman out in the lobby, and he asked to see you." And I said, "Well, send him in." And he walked in, and he said, "Mr. Darcy?" "Yep." He says, "Well, my name is Jim Titus. I sent you a tape, and you hired me." And I said, "I sure did." And and I put him on the air. This is 1960, and he wiped out the competition at night. And so I'd already had an experience with this, and they were in both instances, they were tremendously good decisions and ended up providing us with #1 ratings in many instances. And Jim later went on to KGFJ in Los Angeles and was a big man there most through the early 1960s. I lost track of him after that.
One of the things that I think is really important for our young people to understand here is the fact that in life you will find that you have that one job, maybe two jobs, where you walk in every day and you know that there's something very, very special about where you work and what you do. And it's one of those things that everyone here who is in broadcasting can identify with, that you feel the tradition, or you feel the excitement of the job. You know that you're doing something that really, really is important in terms of the industry. And my question for our WHB panelists here, what was the feeling at Storrs Broadcasting? Because you knew that you were trendsetters. You knew that this was the country's first full-time top 40 music station. You knew that you owned a 50 share of the Kansas City market. What was it like to go to work every day?
Well, there were, at that time, half a dozen stations maybe around the country that were as powerful as WHB was. KJR in Seattle, for one. I also had the pleasure of being there for a while. I think we mentioned a station in Chicago, Cliff in Dallas, McClendon Station. And it was sort of a situation where if you were going to have a job, where would it be? And WHB came up to me more often than anything else. I was program director at a few stations, WCCO and, not WCCO, I'm sorry. One of those many stations I was with. And
We do have a problem that way.
the way I got to WHB, if in case anybody's interested, is I had worked with a gentleman who was director of operations at the station at the time, had been both a Storrs man and a McClendon man for a long time. I was working at WIBC in Indianapolis at the time, okay. And I got a call from Bill Stewart, who was one of the real brains of the industry. He was not a salesman. He was not a disc jockey. He was not a program director. He was a brain. And he came up with many of the concepts that both McClendon and Storrs and others like them used. And I got a call from him one day when I was in Indianapolis, and I was kind of feeling a little bit low at the time. He says, "Hi, Wally, this is Bill Stewart." Well, hello, Bill. "How'd you like to come to the big leagues?" was the question. And I said, "Do you mean WHB?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Yes." It was an incredible station and an incredible experience. I was only there 2.5 years, but it was a couple of the best years of my life. That's all I can say about it.
Ray, what about you?
Well, it was almost like being a star in the city. You know, when they ask you or if you said anything, well, I work at WHB. "Oh, do you? Do you know this guy? Do you know this guy?" Well, of course I do. It was a very, very enjoyable time in life when people were aware of where you were working and what you were part of. And also, we were making a lot of history then, too, on what was going on with broadcast and the fight with KUDL, we didn't think too much about the fight with KUDL, but I know KUDL was really working hard at it, and it was good, and it made us sharper. We thought more about, how this should go on, how they put the plans together for contests and kind of bring all of Kansas City together. I put this up here as basketball. A bunch of us played basketball for WHB, and we would play against high schools around the area, not against the high school team, but against the coaches and some of the stuff in there. And the primary reason is to make money for their charity of the school, and the coaches were always guaranteed to win because we would lose. We made sure that we lost. If we wanted to, we could have played, and beat a lot of them, but it was more association with the city. And
Ray, there were a few close calls, though.
yeah, there was a few times. Yeah, we had to really get real bad there for a couple of times.
One of the things I'll mention is, and you can look at this at intermission when we break to go to our next panel, but Ray has brought a plethora of things from WHB, stuff that is part of his stash of promotional items. He has T-shirts. He has everything that he'd be happy to share and show you. I also want to mention that one of our attendees every year is Greg Ottinger, and Greg is from Kansas City and has surveys. He collects surveys, and in the day, radio stations would actually publish their playlists, and they would make them available at record stores and so on. And so he has a whole collection of WHB, KUDL playlists. WHB called theirs the 40-star survey. And KUDL called, what did KUDL call their survey, Mike?
The Boss 30 survey.
The Boss 30 from KUDL. Yeah. And so anyway, Greg has those that he'll share with you as well, which gets me into the question about promotion. You know, Mike, here you are. You're going up against a giant and probably arguably one of the biggest giants in the country. How did you promote yourself to counter-program and counter-promote WHB?
We had a promotion budget of $1,000 a month. How about that? And we could use it in different things. We could have a name it and claim it and give away records. We could have the $1,000 jackpot and give out a phrase at 7 in the morning, and if you were the 10th person to call at 7 at night, and could you tell us what it was, you would win the deal. And it was limited in that sense. But the one thing we did do is we were very active in the promotion of concerts. We got with some of the concert promoters, and for example, we sponsored the Jimi Hendrix Experience when he was getting started. This was on October the 17th of 1968, and the tickets were exorbitant back then. You could see Jimi Hendrix, and your tickets were either $3, $3.50, $4.50, or $5. And I met Jimi Hendrix in the auditorium backstage, and I said, "Man, you're really hot. You know, you've got a couple of #1 records." And I said, "It's really amazing to meet you." And he was about 5'2", maybe. And he said, "I'm not new to Kansas City." He said, "I was here last year at this time, and I was a guitarist in Jackie Wilson's band, and I was working for $75 a week." So anyway, Jimi Hendrix was one, Three Dog Night, Creedence Clearwater. We did a lot. We went for the 18 to 34 demographic in a big way, because I knew there was no way in the world that we were ever going to knock off WHB. It wasn't going to happen. But we could get a niche and enough of an audience to sell enough advertising to make money with the station, which obviously is everybody's, why are we in it if you're not trying to make some money? And it was the springboard the activity, the fact that we could go after WHB and enjoy some success that allows Star to go public a year or two later. And that was the long-term thing that Peter Starr, the head of Star Broadcasting, had in mind, was to show that it was a young, active, exciting broadcast company, and if you could sell public stock, cash in that way, which he did, and the other owners.
Wally, what promotions stick out in your mind? Or
Mike was talking about were the things that I was thinking about too. But the add-on to that, if I can hitchhike here, is the fact that at the time, WHB would not do concerts because they'd been burned by somebody someplace along the line. So it's a wide open field for KUDL, and KUDL took great advantage of it.
Okay.
The contest I remember is the one that damn near dug up all of Kansas City. There was they had buried a treasure box someplace and give hints to this was here and this was there. And what was it one day? They were digging up by the, some guys were digging up by the World War I memorial, and it was, nothing was there, because this thing finally, it was, there was a big arrow on a billboard, and this box was right below that arrow, but it took them quite a while to get to it. The thing about us in sales versus KUDL, if you would like me to go on to that, sure. We really didn't worry that much, but we kept a side eye at them to be very careful. But the most of it was, you would hear a thing from a client would say, oh, if I want rock and roll radio, I can go to KUDL. And our comment was, is what he was talking about, well, make sure you have your spots on during the daytime, because nobody will hear them at night. And that was the big sales pitch, and it worked very well.
Well, WHB was so established in the market that they didn't really have to do a lot in some cases. I asked one of their salespeople one day, I ran into him, we were calling on the same people, I was coming out, he was going in, or vice versa, and he said, I just made a great sale, and I said, where's your presentation? And he pulled out his rate card. That was his presentation.
And that was all he had to do.
Yeah, that's about all we did.
Wally, I have to ask you this. J. Walter Beethoven. Tell us how that air name happened.
Oh, you got about 2 hours? I was working at a station in Sacramento, California, call letters KRAK at the time. I was the morning disc jockey and program director. I mentioned Bill Stewart earlier, the mind and the brain, and we were just getting the format put together. We were putting on a top 40 format, changing from what they called middle of the road in those days. And Bill decided that all of the disc jockeys on the station were going to have a station name of some sort, and there would be an associating sound effect rather than a theme song. And, well, we had a teddy bear, and you can imagine the sound effect that went with that, and a Richard Carr, and you can figure that one out, and Ron Lyons, and nothing for Wally Thornton, me. And so Bill and I are noodling this thing a little bit, and I said, well, you know, Thunder's a good sound effect. How Wally Thunder, Thunder Thornton, something like that. And Bill said, let me think about that. The very next day, he came back, he said, well, you're going to be Beethoven. And I said, huh? And he said, yeah, you're going to be Beethoven. I said, where does that come from? He said, well, I was reading Peanuts in the comics this morning, and the little kid was playing his piano and playing Beethoven, and Beethoven reminded me of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, which would really make a good sound theme on the air. So you're going to be Beethoven, and we're going to play the opening part of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony to introduce you. So that's what we did. It turned out to be the absolute.
I might make a comment. It was a wonderful decision because we're talking about it 50 years later, and darn near everybody in Kansas City above a certain age, you say J. Walter Beethoven, and they say, oh yeah, the guy that used to be on HB in the morning.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Mike, that it was the best thing in the world that ever happened to me in 15 years on the air because everybody always remembered it. The J. Walter didn't come right away. That was a couple of months later. Ron Lyons, I mentioned him earlier as one of the other disc jockeys on the team. And in those days, we used to get our national advertising commercials on discs about this big, acetate or plastic. And the biggest advertising agency in the world at that time was J. Walter Thompson out of New York, Chicago, the rest of the world. And Ron started calling me J. Walter. My first name is Wally. And I said, what is with this? And I was actually named by two people, is the way it turned out to be. Beethoven by Bill and J. Walter by Ron.
We want to, of course, invite anybody who has questions to let us know. Kyle?
On-air people make pretty fair money.
Highly successful audio people, do they make pretty good money?
Did they? Fair money.
When you say audio people, are you talking about air people?
Did you make a lot of money?
Well, as compared to what Mike made at KUDL, yeah, I made pretty good money, but by
He made the big money, the really big money. He had
it was
we
decent.
were a farm team for Chicago and New York and Los Angeles. 3 of the kids, and I say kids because they weren't even 21, went on to New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and a couple of them are still functioning today. Humble Harry that I hired he's been to San Francisco, Los Angeles. He's down in Houston now, and my goodness, there were half a dozen others. So we put up a good fight, but we realized that we were David and Goliath was over there at 7'10" with lots of bucks. So.
Isn't that why people moved so often, was because they bigger market, more money, bigger market, more money?
Well, Ron Martin used to be the program director at WHB, and he moved on to L.A. To be a program director there for major dinero. Yeah, Phil J. did very well too. I knew that. Yeah. He and I kind of chummed around together, and no, they did well at that time. Yeah. Today,
well, part of the reason that some of us went to sales was because the salesmen were making more money than we were.
Yeah.
So tell me, what was a Kansas City radio salary like in those days? Can you maybe frame it in terms of what it would be today?
Well, I can tell you what cuddles were in those days. Most of the jocks worked for like $500 to $600 a month, and so take that times like what? I don't know. It wasn't. I think probably over. I don't know what HB was paying. Wally told me what he was making one time. And
while that was going on, I had my last contract was $16,000.
I could have paid our whole air staff with your salary.
$16,000 a year, not a month.
On the sales end of it, I worked for up till the 1st of September, January to 1st of September, in 1968. Was it 68? Yeah, 68. I made $9,400 in commission. I went to KMBC TV as a salesperson, and from September to December, I made $13,700. So, sales is pretty good.
Yeah, yeah. We had another question here. Yeah, Greg?
I listened to both WHB and KUDL, and I remember about 1967, 68, something called underground radio was born, and on FM, and my God, they'd play the whole of Inagata Davida in one sitting, a whole album side. How did KUDL and WHB tackle FM underground radio at all?
Well, the FM underground radio that you probably were listening to at the time was KCJC. And that was also owned by Star Broadcasting. And it used to irritate me no end that we were playing Inagata Davida on AM on KUDL, the 3-minute, 55-second version, and they were playing the 18-minute version. And they also, we played the Doors, Light My Fire, 3.5, 4-minute version, and they played the long version, 9 or 10. And I would talk to Pete Starr, I'd say, Pete, we're competing with ourselves. And he said, oh, no, it's a totally different audience. It's underground, you know. And I said, well, okay, you're the owner, you're the boss, so. And KCJC later went on to, well, that was actually, you know, that was the black swan that was lurking in the background. You know, I knew that KUDL was never going to knock WHB out of, you know, out of their position overall for any length of time. But what none of us seemed to understand at that time was that FM was coming along, and it was going to end up before it was over with, just running us all off the dial, so to speak.
If I can add a little bit here, just for your information, and maybe for the information of even these two gentlemen, it was in those days of Top 40 radio, very prudent of record producers, if they had thought that they really had a hit at all, to make sure that it ran less than 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. Shorter the record, better the song, the more play they got, and the more commercials we got to play.
Mm-hmm. And plus the disc jockeys liked the longer ones because they could run down the hall.
Yeah, you always had to have one long hit song around someplace because it was quite far.
Live radio, folks. Yeah, exactly. One of the things we will point out is that KCJC FM was what became KUDL FM, and so many of you from the metro area, you know about KUDL FM, and KUDL FM just switched to all news about 3 years ago, and the call letters KUDL finally left Kansas City. Where are the call letters now, Mike?
KUDL AM is in Sacramento, and KUDL FM, I think, is in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
And they're owned by, who is it? Cumulus, not Cumulus, Clear Channel, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions from our audience here? Other questions? As you think of something, just hold up your hand. One of the things, because we have about 20 minutes, I'd like to ask each one of you kind of a philosophical question. As you drive down the road and you listen to WHB today, which is no longer at 710, it's at 810 on the dial, and as you listen to what was the 1380 frequency, do you ever stop and think about the legacy? And do you ever stop and think about what it was that you contributed to the history of broadcasting? Because this was a very historic type of situation. A David going after a Goliath and a seemingly overmatched David going after Goliath and actually having such a big competition, two different styles of presentation. And KUDL, incidentally, was really what radio would become. You know, less talk, more music. WHB did kind of find that its all-personality format was kind of on the downward side eventually with listeners. So there was a lot of history that we've talked about here. And really, from a micro perspective, we've looked at the Kansas City market, and this was the kind of thing going on across the country. But how do you feel, or what do you feel, first of all, is your legacy, and what kinds of things do you want the students in our audience today to carry with them about your contribution to radio? Mike, I'll start with you.
I think my contribution, if anything, was pursuing causes that were real David Goliath deals. I never had the opportunity of being program director of a station below 1,000 on the dial that had 10,000 watts or anything. And in 2 or 3 instances, I was able to create #1 ratings. And in all instances, I was able to work with the sales departments to make money. I also was program director of KOWH, which by the time I got there in 1964, KOIL, who I'd also worked for out of college, had pretty well beaten them up, and they even changed call letters to Cameo, and in '64 we changed it back to KOWH and did an easy listening top 40, middle of the road top 40, and we didn't make a lot of rating points, but we were able to make enough money to finance the purchase of KISD and Sioux Falls and turn it into a #1 top 40, and buy KUDL, and then Little Rock, and then 3 R&B stations, the OK Group in Memphis, New Orleans, and Houston, and then the company went public. And that was, my idea of having been a success in the business. By then, I had 4 children, and, our 2 most prized possessions were a car that operated properly and a nice U-Haul truck attachment for the back bumper. And I decided, it's time to do something where you're not changing cities every 2 years. Even people like Gary Owens, that was on Laughton, who also was at KOIL a year before me. This guy's been to 27 or 8 radio stations in his career, and he's one of the best that ever lived. So anyway, my idea of a success for me was taking a couple of radio stations that frankly were so down and out that the joke was even the transmitter engineer didn't listen to them, and end up building what turned out to be a publicly held broadcasting company.
Wally, what's the legacy you left?
Well, when I first went into radio, which was 1953, as you mentioned, at the top side, I was living in the western part of the United States. Television was basically brand new at that time in that part of the country. And of course, at that time, everybody was saying, radio is dead. So why am I in radio? And we had to do something in order to stay alive. And I believe that part of what the Storrs organization and the McClendon Group and Star and all of those people that formed this so-called kiddie radio did just exactly that. I believe in my own heart that if Top 40 Radio had not come along, radio might be a dead issue, and it's bigger than ever right now. And of course, now the new media is saying radio is dead again. I doubt it.
Ray?
That's a tough one. I started in radio back in the late 50s, not being a disc jockey, but being a part of a dialogue similar to this on a black radio station in Harvey, Illinois. And we were part of a street gang, street rod, whatever you want to call it, and it was called the Chicago Road Angels. And that got me started in wanting to be in broadcast. Went from there to, my dad got transferred, we went to St. Joseph, Missouri. I went to work in the company he was with, and I was tired of it, and I said, I'm going back to radio. So I interviewed for a job at KKJO in St. Joe. After spending a full day before the interview in the edible tankage area of Swift and Company. And I kept on telling those guys, let me go home and take a shower and I'll be back. No, come on. And they only stayed in the room with me for a short period of time. But I did get the job. And I sold there, and then I went up against the competition, which was another rock station, KUSN, in St. Joe. And their owners also had a station in Topeka called KEWI. And some of you guys that are from around here will remember that old station, and that was a rocker station trying to compete against WHB, as everybody was. That's where I got off to WHB, and then I found my real place where I wanted to be, which was in television. And television at that time and up until the 80s when I left it was Hollywood. And you were a big thing if you were in television at that time, as it was when you were in radio in the 50s and 60s. That was a big deal. And television was a big deal later. And now, like Wally said, this new internet stuff is going to tear radio completely apart. He said no, and now they're saying it's going to tear television completely apart because of streaming and everything else. CBS has now gone into it. Netflix and a few of these other ones. And pretty soon all the networks will be in there because they're hurting real bad. The networks are having a lot of problems because of the streaming of other things, i.e. Netflix and whatever else, and the association with the millennials, which are a lot of you are in here, prefer to do that or on their cell phones. No, I'm not going to give you any trouble. I know when I never held a sales meeting when cell phones were big things, but I know the first thing that would have happened is you're going to shut them off. I do that to my grandkids when they come to the house for dinner. I was just happy I was there. I was just so happy, and I hope I contributed something to it. But radio and television contributed more to me and helped me out and helped me be a good business owner, because I own several businesses too.
Well, one of the things I want to point out is that my class is here today, and I make them tweet. They have to tell me the story. So that's why they've got the cell phones out. They have to tweet from this event. One of the things that I think is important to point out is that all three of our panelists today are members of the Kansas City Legends, and the Kansas City Legends is a group of people who at one time were on the air in Kansas City radio and television. And so the invitation was extended to Dave McFarland and John DeSanto and me to join the Kansas City Legends, and so we're very proud members of this group, even though we never worked in Kansas City broadcasting. It's so great to rub elbows with people who are. And one of the things to tell you is that this group has reached out to K-State because they really feel that there's a lot of knowledge and there's a lot of advice that is available from years and years and years and years and years of experience in the Kansas City market and around the country. And so you've been able to hear the recollections of our panelists today. One final question for everybody. You know, things have changed in our business, and yet things haven't changed, because there are still some things that you would probably consider to be time-honored philosophy and time-honored advice that you could give to students about our business. What advice would you have for our students? Ray, I'll start with you.
If they want to get into the broadcast business, they better make that their livelihood, their desire, their everything when they wake up in the morning. And you got to work hard to get to that area. Find internships if you can. Visit stations as much as possible. Sharpen your skills in sales, because sales on top of being a disc jockey or whatever is an important part of being a disc jockey. Mm-hmm. You know, and like Wally said, radio is not going to die, but it's having a hard time right now. But you have to be part of it. You have to participate in it in any way that you possibly can, and read as much as you can about it, and talk to as many people as you can, and visit as many stations that'll talk to you.
Okay.
And that's the hard part.
Ditto, ditto, and ditto.
Ditto, ditto.
Just on top of what Ray has said, it is not a 9-to-5 job or an 8-to-4 or anything of that nature. If you're really into broadcast of any kind, whether it's radio or television, it's all-consuming. So if you're not ready to be married to the job, don't do it.
Yeah. Okay. So true.
Mike?
I second everything that Wally just said. If and I'll speak from my programming side of things, all of the famous disc jockeys that any of you are familiar with, the ones that really accomplished tremendous rating success, national recognition, there was one thing that they did do that the majority of the everyday DJs did not do, and probably still don't do. And there was an old axiom in those days at some of the larger stations. For example, Chuck Lorre at KFWB had a rule that if you were on for 3 hours, you did 3 hours of show preparation. In other words, you never flew by the seat of your pants. If you had 15 music selections you were going to play in an hour, you sat down for an hour and figured out what you were going to say to start that song, what you were going to say when it was over, how you were going to introduce a commercial. There was nothing really spontaneous except the ability of you as a performer to sound spontaneous. But preparation, preparation, preparation. And it's easy to say, and as Wally said, you got to make it your number one priority, because if you get started in a small market, whatever that is anymore, the 30 or below in the country, the only way you're going to get up to a major market is to do things like that, because you can't just walk in 5 minutes before showtime and be on the air for 3 hours doing a personality program flying by the seat of your pants. It just won't work. And the ones that really succeeded were the ones that basically were doing a scripted show. And I didn't realize that in the early days, because most of the stations I worked at, they had you doing 4 hours on the air and 3 hours of production and show prep, unless you were going to work 12 hours a day. That kind of took a back seat. So anyway, preparation would be my suggestion.
I had one more comment to make. Been married to my wife for 53 years. She's been through with me thick and thin. And we were sitting down, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about it. And she says, you know, I am so happy you're retired. She says, at least I get to see you now and then, and you're no longer married to your job. And that's what we were. You're married to your job, you live with it, eat it, sleep it, everything.
This is a remarkable story, and it will continue actually in our next panel, because we're going to be talking about people who are using the internet to recreate kind of what you heard, the golden age of radio, and some of the features that were very, very prevalent in top 40 music formats. But we're going to talk about the future, because streaming is the future platform in the broadcasting business. Dave, you have some closing. Okay, so we have books for sale today. We don't have books for sale today, but we have order blanks for books. There we go. So we'd really like to thank our panelists, because get this, we sent a state car over to pick up Ray and Wally today, and so Eric Name drove the car for us. Vern Work is going to take them back to Kansas City this evening, but they are going to stay for the next panel and be a part of this. We want to thank all of our panelists today for being with us. Now, as a reminder, we do have some memorabilia from Kansas City Radio. We have some surveys from the Kansas City Radio era, and we will certainly give you the opportunity to mingle with our guests. Our next panel begins at 3 o'clock, and so we hope you'll stay around for that.